Okay, I'm back. I don't know. I've been getting bumped off a lot since I've been here at school, but hopefully we'll be back for good. I hope you know that if I get knocked off that I'll be attempting to get back in. Where was I? Oh yeah, the transition plan. Where did that go? It was in Google. Google. Okay, here it is. So this is in the stream part of the Google Classroom. That's usually where I put announcements and things like that. Um, so the way that it's working is that students who have limited or no connectivity, they've been on campus for about 3 weeks, but I heard that there was only one student. I don't know. So students who, if you know there are people who don't have internet, it's not working, they're having a lot of trouble with their connections, then you might want to suggest that they can come to campus. They will have to bring a Chromebook or something like that. There are no more Chromebooks on campus to lend out or for students to use when they come to school. So if there's anybody in that situation, then those students can return. They have been returning for 3 weeks. Also this week, 5th, 6th, and 12th grade students who are failing 2 or more core subjects can come to campus. So they're going to start with students who are struggling with the virtual learning situation. And you'll see as the weeks progress going into next week, there's this idea that they're adding 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 7th, 8th, and 9th students who are failing 2 or more core subjects. And then each week they sort of add on, oops, oh, whoa. They sort of add on another group. The 2nd week of November, in week 11, there's the, let me see, 10th and 11th grade students who are failing 2 or more core subject areas. So if you're not failing anything, they're basically delaying your opportunity to return to school if you want until the week of the 16th of November. So at that point, anybody who wants to come to school for hybrid can do that. Don't expect that it's going to be like a regular class session. The teachers are going to be behind their partitions mainly and doing virtual learning. So you'll have to bring your own device. The majority of people are still going to be at home according to the surveys. So, you know, there's a lot of social distancing. There's only one person per table in the cafeteria. So if you do end up coming for hybrid, it's not like it's going to be a regular class period. They are going to be changing the schedule. I don't think I mentioned that. Probably about the time that we're going to be going on Thanksgiving, when all the students who want to come to school for hybrid can do that, is about the time that they're going to change the schedule from this 8 o'clock until 2:45 situation with the teacher time at the end to a regular school day. So they're going to go back to the regular block schedule. From what I understand, it will still be Monday, Tuesday, AB, synchronous, and then the asynchronous. It's just that the daily schedule, they're going to go until 4 with the blocks. And then there won't be that teacher time at the end. But more on that as things come along. Do y'all have any questions about the hybrid transition situation? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute if you have a question. Remember that if you choose to be virtual, you can still do virtual. That's always an option. They're talking about that to the end of the year, maybe even into next year. So that's something that you always have the opportunity. There is a survey that you need to do, especially if you're planning on switching. So say you're going to come on hybrid as soon as it's possible for you to do so. There's a survey and you need to fill that out so that they know that you're coming. We have a code in the system that tells us who's supposed to be coming and who's supposed to be virtual. So there is, you can only do that by the 6 weeks. So every 6 weeks, there's a survey for you to fill out about whether you're going to continue with online learning or whether you're going to come into school for hybrid. So if you have questions about that too, you can let me know. I think that there's a survey on the district website. I'll look into that and maybe I'll post it. But I think people that I've talked to, most people are staying on virtual. Also, just a reminder that this is the last week of October, so seniors, you should be finishing up your FAFSA and your Applied Texas. If you need any help with either one of those things, then reach out. The counselors are there for you. College and Career Center. I will look at essays or answer questions if I can on your application, but those should be finishing up pretty soon. Scholarships are going to ask you for your FAFSA information that they return to you. So after you fill out the FAFSA, you get some reports, and a lot of schools and also scholarships are going to ask you for some of that information from your FAFSA scores. So they're not really scores, they're more like, they call them estimated family contributions or something like that. So if you have questions about that, please ask. I know that the counselors are setting up some sessions to continue helping with FAFSA in case you have a question or you have a circumstance that you're not sure about. You can watch in the College and Career Center Google Classroom and also the Google Classroom for your counselor. They're probably making announcements about that. Any more updates? Anything else that I didn't talk about that's going on?
Miss Ramos, my Cosmo teacher was like telling us what was gonna happen like with the transition, and she said that next week we're gonna all next week that it's gonna be synchronous, but I know she gets her information from the principal at High, and I asked her if it was the same for East, and she said that she knew it was similar.
That is not my understanding. My understanding is that we're going to be continuing on asynchronous and synchronous for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank
So
you.
yeah, I can check into that to verify it with the principal, but no, in other words, you'd have to sign in every single day, all day on Zoom calls. I don't think that's going to be happening. Now, that is true in elementary and middle school. They have a whole different schedule. But at the high school level, because the students are more mature and more able to handle their own learning and so on, they are allowing for synchronous and asynchronous days. The way they do it elementary is, from what I understand, kind of like, maybe you have younger brothers and sisters, you already know this. The teacher will get on, they'll do a little lesson, and then it'll be like, okay, work on that for 15 minutes. And then they come back, and it's sort of like synchronous and asynchronous on and off throughout the day. And then like little break time and so on and so forth. So they design it that way because kids and their attention spans and their work ethic, they need more guidance. So at the high school level, I'm assuming that we're still doing synchronous and asynchronous. Even after we go to the regular schedule, I still think it's going to be synchronous Monday and Tuesday. Now, it is the teacher's choice on those asynchronous days to have class. So technically, an A-day teacher could say on an A week, we're meeting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday during our class period for class. Like if they wanted to do it like that. I don't feel like that's necessary for these classes. These STC classes were actually designed to not have any face-to-face meeting time, but I do think it helps things. Yeah, I think that that's teacher discretion. I know Mr. Ramos is doing lessons on the asynchronous days for students to help them with their pieces that they're writing and stuff like that. So yeah, I think from what I understand, that's optional, but I'll double check with the principal now that we're transitioning and just make sure that that's okay. I'll send a message out about that later. Sorry, I have to write everything down or I'm going to forget. I think that would be a big burden on you if you're at home doing virtual learning, because how do you organize your time if you have to be on all those Zoom calls? I don't know, all day Zooms. I don't think that's necessary for secondary school, but I will check and verify. Anything else? That's a good question. Any other questions, things that you're wondering about? No? Okay, moving on to the lesson. There are some things that I want to go through today. One of them is the part about form that you should have read for today. You should have read in the book about closed form. And I want to go through that a little bit just to reinforce the notes that you're doing on the terminology, and especially to emphasize sonnet, because the 3 pieces that you read for today and did 1, 2, 3 analysis were all sonnets. And sonnets are a really good example of closed form because they're short, They have a pattern to them. They have a structure that you can rely on. And the textbook goes over that. And then we're going to work in some groups on that assignment. Before we do that, let me go down to this week's assignments, because I'm thinking that when you work in your groups, is whenever you turn in your group assignment, you can just be done for the class period. Let me pin this up here. Okay. So if I go through the assignments down here, then in your groups, whenever you're finished with your assignment, you can just go ahead and sign off. So this week, I want for you to work on reading about open form. So we have closed form for this week, which is very structured poetry that follows certain rules. Open form is like free verse, where poets have more freedom in how they structure their poems. So read in the textbook about that. And then there are 2 poems to look at: The Fish and Facing It. I put PDFs of them here. Some people like printing them out or just, annotating them on the screen. Kami is, I think, the best screen annotation for PDFs. It's a free Chrome extension, Kami. I think I've mentioned that before. Also, you should be working on your poetry presentation. Oh, I didn't link to it here. Oh, darn it. I have to go back and link to it. Let me see. It's going to be in the recent ones. It's in last week's, but I have to link to it for this week. Here it is. You should be trying to locate a poem, if you haven't already, that you want to do for your presentation. The presentation needs to be posted on Saturday or before. The assignment is to make a video. You do not have to physically appear in the video, but your voice should, because you should be walking us through the poem that you've chosen. The only qualifications that I have for choosing the poem is that I want you to focus on a social issue. I want you to think about how poetry can express social concerns. So you can choose whichever issue you want. It could be historical, something from time long ago, or it could be more modern. And I want for you to choose a poem by a published author with a legitimate name, not an internet pseudonym. You could also do a pair of poems if you wanted to. If you have 2 that have like opposing viewpoints or 2 different voices, you can do that, but the requirement for the assignment is 1 poem. And then you should make about a 10-minute video where you go through the poem in explication. I've given examples of that live in class. Basically, it's doing a 1, 2, 3 analysis for somebody to watch. I also did one on YouTube, so I'll list a few examples, some of those examples that I've done before, but if you're doing a walkthrough of a 1, 2, 3 analysis, then that should be fine. But just make sure that you pick a poem that is rich enough that you're going to hit that 10-minute mark. If you pick a poem that doesn't have much to say, it might be easier for you to do, but then it's going to be a 4-minute video, and what are you going to do with the other 6 minutes of time? So try to pick something that's rich, or maybe that's when you decide to put in another poem. If you choose 2 poems, I want you to choose them on the same social issue, right? They should be complementary to each other. So you can just film it with your phone. You can edit it if you want, but it's not necessary to do that. Some people know how to edit and some people don't. I tend to use iMovie when I'm editing, but different people have different programs for that. But you don't even really have to. You can just shoot a continuous stream of you going through the poem. The thing I want to show you is how to upload it, because that's going to be on by Saturday. I know I went through this the other day, but it was kind of like, before we even started the project. If you go up here to where it says class discussions in the left-hand navigation, class discussions is where you're going to upload your video or copy paste the link to your video. I think the easiest way is to upload to YouTube, make it unlisted if you don't want everybody to see your video. That way the only people that you share the link with will be able to see the video, not the whole wide world. But you can you submit it here. So you click right here where it says poetry explication presentation, and it will ask you to create a thread right here. So I did put a video about how to upload. So if you need to watch that, there's a little tutorial there. So what we should have after Saturday is a bunch of people, everybody in class should have posted their video or a link to their video so that it's accessible to everybody. And we'll start seeing that populate on this page here underneath here, and the dates will start popping up here, and there'll be your name next to it and so on. Then before next Wednesday, and I'll remind you on Tuesday in our next meeting, I want you to look at 2 of your classmates' explication presentations and answer their questions. Each presentation should have 2 study questions. So I did put a link in here about that. I know I mentioned it last time, but I did put some question stems up here. If you're having trouble coming up with study questions, then I put some ideas here for you. You don't have to use these, but if you're stuck, I do want you to present 2 study questions, because when people respond to your video, it's not just a matter of them putting in criticism or, you know, like positive reinforcement. I want you also to interact with the poem itself. So I want you to answer the 2 study questions on your chosen classmates' videos and then give some, you know, feedback on their presentation. So there's 2 different grades for that. There's one for your own video that you're creating, you know, follow the guidelines. And then there's another separate grade for your participation in looking at other people's projects and responding to them. So then what will start happening is the threads will start to branch out. So say, for example, if I'm in this one here, this is a link to a video, I can reply to that and it will be a branch underneath that. And so as you're responding to other people's videos, you can just hit reply, answer the questions, and give some constructive feedback about their presentation. So we'll start to see things populate underneath each one of the presentations, if that makes sense. Are there any questions about how that works? I know if you've used discussion boards before, then it's probably not too complicated. But if you haven't used discussion boards before, I don't want you to get to the point where it's, you know, deadlines looming and you're confused about how to upload it. That's why I made the video. Is that clear? Is there anything else I can go over about that? This is where I got the question stems. I just put them into the assignment. I didn't have them there last week, but as I was going over, it occurred to me that I want to put those in. So Saturday is the due date for your video, and then Wednesday next week is the deadline for the critique, because next week we're moving on to the next unit. We're leaving poetry behind after this week. All right, any questions about the project? Let's see, nothing in chat. Okay. All right, so that's the assignment list here for this week and preparation for next Tuesday. I want to jump back up to lesson here and just go through form a little bit with you. You should have read and made notes on the terminology on these pages. Especially, I'm hoping that you made notes on the sonnet information. Boy, that page got curved. So when we're talking about poetry and we're talking about structure of poetry, the first big classification category is closed form, open form. And what that basically means is, are there rules to this format of poetry or are there not rules? Not rules is open form, and closed form is there are rules. There has to be a certain number of syllables per line, or it has to rhyme in a certain pattern, that kind of thing. So when we're talking about poetic form, those are the 2 basic, you know, categories. You should have read about closed form for today. The assignment for next week is about open form. On the second page here, on page 815, is where they start differentiating on different types of closed forms. There are hundreds of forms of poetry. There's certain ones that we focus on in education, like probably when you were younger, you read haiku. And maybe you've talked about sonnets, maybe when you were reading a Shakespearean play or something like that. But if it has rules about how it has to be structured, then that's closed form. They talk about terza rima, they talk about sestina, and that sort of thing. There's a little introduction to open form poetry down here and imagism, but I want you to focus today, we're going to focus on sonnets. So they go on and talk about closed form. Sometimes there's a pattern that isn't super obvious, and it's about the metrical pattern, not about the rhyme. So sometimes people will look at a poem, and if it doesn't rhyme on the ends in any kind of pattern, they'll think that it's an open form poem. But sometimes there are patterns just in the syllables that are in the line, and like blank verse and other types of metrical patterns. So they give an example of blank verse. You can see here's an example of it from Hamlet, where there are 10 syllables per line and they are stressed with unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, but they don't rhyme on the end. That's so that it sounds kind of like conversation, but a little bit also like poetry. It's like elevated conversation. So there's a pattern to it, but it's kind of a hidden pattern because it's only in the syllable patterns. Every other syllable is louder and stronger in an accented syllable pattern. So they give me an example of that. Stanzas, I think we all knew about that, but they talk about heroic couplet. So a heroic couplet is a fixed form where you have two lines together that rhyme with one another, and they're in iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is just a fancy phrase for 10 syllables per line in alternating unstressed, stressed patterns. By stressed, we mean the louder syllables, and by unstressed, we mean the softer syllables. We don't think about that in English because we don't put in the diacritical accent. In Spanish, we do. Maybe many of you have names that if you're writing it in the traditional sense, you would put an accent. There are rules about that in Spanish. You would put the accent over one of the vowel sounds in your name. We do have accented syllables in English because we don't talk like robots, but we don't put the diacritical accent on them. So that's what we're talking about. When you see that accent mark, it means that's the syllable that you emphasize. And it helps you to pronounce the word or the name or whatever properly. So heroic couplets are written in that iambic pentameter, that soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, which mimics regular human speech for the most part. And they give you some examples. I do like this book for the examples. Then they talk about terza rima, which has a different sort of rhyme scheme, and they give you that one. We've already read a poem that is written in terza rima, and that's Acquainted with the Night. It has that ABA. Sometimes they call that interlaced rhyme because the AB, whatever's in the middle of the first stanza, is on the outside of the second stanza, and it just keeps interlocking like that. Quatrain is a good term to know. That means 4 lines of poetry that are together in a clump. Clump is not a nice word, but you get it. Then there's ballad stanza, which has alternating lines. That one sounds more like a song, and the word ballad can help you remember that. But there's a pattern to that that alternates between 8 syllables and 6 syllables, and a lot of poets use that in like the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Common measure, I'm probably not going to get into this stuff too much, but you do need to know about the Spenserian stanza. That's going to come up in today's assignment. All right, then they talk about sonnets. All 3 of the poems that you read for this week were sonnets, but they're all 3 different types. So your assignment today in your groups is going to be to go through one of those poems, whichever one you decide on in your group, and try to classify it. What type of sonnet is it? So you can refer back to this page in your text. This is where they talk about the Spenserian stanza, and then this is where they talk about the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan stanzas. And then there are a bunch of examples after that. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them because you have them here in your text. Also on the assignment, there is a link that will take you to a place where you can explore that. There are, I don't know, 6 or 7 different types of sonnets. We tend to teach the English sonnet and the Italian sonnet, but there are other types, and they're just different closed forms that are 14 lines long with a certain pattern to them, a certain pattern of rhyme, a certain pattern of meter through the line. So that's pretty much it. The rest of it was basically examples of different Shakespearean sonnets. We use Shakespeare a lot because he wrote a lot of sonnets. He wrote 156 sonnets or something like that. A lot of them. So is there anything else from the reading that you want me to talk about? You want me to spend a little time talking about the Petrarchan and the Shakespearean sonnets, or the activity will work you through it somewhat? I'll tell you what, when you're working on the assignment, I'll stop in the groups a little bit and see if you have questions. So let's go back to that group assignment. If you click right here, you will see the activity, but I distributed it in the Google Classroom. So you might want to do that one. It's under assignments right here, because then that way you can get the document. I'm going to have you submit this on Google Classroom. So it's a grade for East only, for practicing this closed form. So if you click here, it will distribute a copy of the assignment to you. Let me go through the assignment. You really only need one person in your group to go and grab the assignment. I don't want each person to turn in an assignment. I want you to turn in a group document. So the first page are the directions. I'll give the directions, and I'll put you in your breakout rooms, and then I'll stop in your rooms and see if you have questions or how it's going. So one person in your group needs to go and like make a copy and then share the document with the other people in the group. Give everybody the ability to write on the document. And then you'll have to decide which of the 3 poems from this week you would like to work with. So discuss among yourselves, which one did you like, which one do you think is going to be the best one for you to work with as a group. And that's the one you're going to focus on, and basically you're going to be classifying it. If you go to the second, there are 2 parts to the assignment. The first page is just the directions. So the first part is to classify your sonnet. Put in, once you talk about it, decide which sonnet you want to do, put in the title and the author, and then you'll have to decide what type of sonnet is it. And like I said, there are 6 or 7 different types of sonnets. If you click on this link here, it will take you to a page that describes each type. So whichever one you pick, I want you to go through and figure out what are the qualities of that particular type of sonnet that made you classify it in that genre. And then you can put that classification here. And then I want you to go through the poem and just put a few pieces of evidence, and everybody can work on the document at the same time. So everybody should be putting evidence and putting ideas on the chart, and put in all the things that make it true. So if you say this is a Shakespearean sonnet, then I want you to go through and drop in here how we know that. How do we know that this particular sonnet that you're working with is a Shakespearean sonnet, for example, or an English sonnet? Once you're finished with that, then I want you to do some work with your poetic idea or your theme that you came up with when you were doing your analysis. So same poem. In part 2, I want you to each put your name across the top here. So that's why I want you to all do the same document. Then whoever went and got it can submit it, but I'll see all the names here. So I'll go ahead and give you your grade based on your participation in this one document together. So put your name in the yellow part, and then you're going to each have a column. So say group member 1 is going to put their name in here, somebody else from the group will put their name there. And then in the blue part, this gray part here, I want you to put in your theme that you came up with for the poem in stage 3 of your 1, 2, 3 analysis. So maybe when you're talking about which poem you want to choose for your group, you might want to pick the one that you feel like as a group you have the strongest grasp on in terms of theme. So these two colored ones are for you to do in your column, and then the white ones down here are for your group members. Then I want you to go to your group members and put pieces of the poem or comments that support that theme. So say this is, say Helen puts her name here, Helen B. I just made that person up. And then she's going to put in her theme for the poem that you've been discussing. And then group member 2 is going to go ahead and put in proof. Maybe it's a quote, maybe it's a commentary that helps to prove that theme is true. So I want you to sort of substantiate each other's themes. Maybe you're just pulling a quote from one of the lines. Maybe don't just put the line numbers, put the quote. Or maybe you just want to make a comment. So after Helen's done putting in her theme, Helen's going to go work over here in these other columns because she's going to be looking at what her group members put in for their theme and trying to give proof for that theme. And other people are going to go on to Helen's and start putting that in there, if that makes sense. I know that sounds kind of confusing, but I think that it will make more sense when you get in your groups. Are there any questions before I set up the groups? All right, let me go to my notes here. I'm going to start putting y'all in some groups. If you're in a group with people and you didn't make a group ahead of time, then, let me check my inbox here and see if there are any groups. Nope, no new groups. Then I want for you to make sure that you're conversing. You don't have to put on your camera, but I do want you to be working together to set up the, work on the assignment. Okay. All right, you're going to start to see a notification for your groups pop up. Groups.